It was a disaster that began with her innocent smile. Who could have thought that behind that angelic face lay a demon, ready to destroy two families? I didn't want to believe my eyes, didn't want to succumb to temptation, but her methods were flawless, and I was weak. She appeared in our lives suddenly, like a storm. My son, always serious and reserved, fell head over heels in love with her, with Maria. But just a few months after their wedding, I began to notice her shadow not only in our home but also in my thoughts. She was like a cat, sneaking through the darkness, ready to pounce at any moment.
Thank you for watching my channel. I create videos for your enjoyment. Please subscribe if you want to support my efforts, it's very important to me. I apologize in advance for any mistakes, dubbing is done by neural network. Please point out mistakes in the comments so I can correct them.
The first signs of her attention I tried to ignore, light touches, fleeting glances that lingered slightly on my lips. I thought it was just a game of my imagination, a product of my fatigue and loneliness. But then she started to act bolder. One day, I came home earlier than usual and found Maria in the kitchen, wearing nothing but a towel that barely covered her body. She explained that she had just taken a shower and hadn't had time to dress. Her wet hair and the droplets of water sliding down her skin heightened my confusion. She stood so close that I could feel her warmth and the scent of her shampoo. I barely managed to avert my gaze and retreat to my room. Another time, she came to my study to help with some papers. She sat across from me and started crossing her legs, her skirt riding up, revealing her thighs. Her movements were smooth, like a predator waiting for the right moment to strike. She smiled, pretending not to notice my discomfort. Once, when we were alone at home, she asked me to help with the zipper of her dress. I approached her, my hands trembling as I tried to zip up the back. She leaned slightly back, her back pressing against my body, and I felt her breath on my cheek. The zipper seemed to resist my efforts, and I realized it was all part of her plan. There was a time when I started avoiding her gaze altogether, afraid that my eyes would betray the growing desire within me. But she wasn't easily dissuaded. One evening, when my son was working late, she invited me to watch a movie with her. She chose a romantic drama, full of intimate scenes that made my discomfort unbearable. As we sat on the couch, her leg brushed against mine, and she casually laid her head on my shoulder, sighing softly. I tried to focus on the screen, but her scent, her warmth and the softness of her skin against mine made it impossible to think clearly. When she looked up at me, her eyes full of something I couldn't, or didn't want to name, I knew I was losing the battle. The next day, I tried to distance myself further. I spent more hours at work, even took on extra projects just to avoid being home. But Maria found ways to draw me back in. She would call me at odd hours, with flimsy excuses: "The faucet is leaking, can you help?" Or "I'm having trouble with the TV, can you come fix it?" And each time, I felt myself weakening, the line between right and wrong blurring. The anticipation of what might happen when I arrived at her beckoning call was as terrifying as it was thrilling. I remember one night when I couldn't sleep and went to the kitchen for a glass of water. There, I found my daughter-in-law standing by the open fridge. She was wearing a short silk nightgown that barely covered her curves. The light from the fridge illuminated her body, creating a tantalizing play of shadows. She turned, noticing me, and smiled, slowly closing the fridge door. "I can't sleep," she said softly, almost whispering. Maria stepped close to me, her hands sliding over my chest as she pressed herself against me. "I'm so lonely," she whispered, her lips almost brushing mine. Her fingers started unbuttoning my shirt, and I felt my resistance melting with each of her movements. Another time, she walked into the bathroom while I was showering. She was wearing only a thin robe, which she quickly discarded, standing naked before me. Her body, illuminated by the soft light, was irresistibly attractive. She stepped under the water with me, her skin touching mine, and the hot water seemed to intensify the sensation. "I can't hide this anymore," she whispered, pressing against me, her hands sliding over my shoulders, my back moving lower. Her lips found mine, and I felt my will completely dissolve. There were moments when I tried to assert control, to put an end to the madness. I confronted her once, trying to express the turmoil she was causing in my life. But she only smiled, a knowing smile that made it clear she understood the power she held over me. "You can't deny what's between us," she whispered, stepping closer until there was no space left between us. "You're as much a part of this as I am." Her words were like poison, seeping into my mind and weakening my resolve. She kissed me then, a kiss so charged with electricity that it left me breathless, my resolve crumbling in the face of her relentless pursuit. Our secret meetings became a sick routine. The thrill was intoxicating, yet it was slowly eating away at my soul. We would meet in hidden corners of the house, or in secluded places outside, where no one would recognize us. I'd catch a glimpse of her in public, and she'd give me that look, a look that told me she was thinking of nothing but our next encounter. It was unbearable and irresistible at the same time. I would sit at dinner with my wife and son, my stomach churning with guilt, while Maria would smile across the table, knowing full well the effect she had on me. It was a silent torture, and I knew I was the one letting it happen. Then came a night I'll never forget. Maria invited me out, saying she had something special planned. We met at a quiet spot outside of town. She had prepared a picnic under the stars, far from any prying eyes. We drank wine, and as the night grew darker, her intentions became clearer. We ended up in each other's arms on that blanket, with the night sky as our witness. The reality of what we were doing hit me then, but it was too late. I was too far gone, too lost in the web of our affair. That night, I crossed a line I never thought I would, and from that point on, there was no turning back. I remember another evening when she came over while my son was at work. I noticed she was in a particular mood. She first offered to make dinner, but soon suggested we have a glass of wine. She wore a lace dress that barely concealed her figure. During dinner, she became increasingly uninhibited. Her movements grew more provocative, her gaze more intense. When she stood up to pour more wine, I saw how her dress slipped over her hips, only barely touching her skin. One night, she came into my bedroom with a bucket of ice and a bottle of champagne. At first, we just drank, and the conversation became more intimate. Her eyes sparkled with excitement, and her words were full of innuendos. When she stood up and began dancing in front of me, her movements were seductive and alluring. Soon, the champagne was set aside, and her lips found mine again, her hands exploring every part of my body. Then there was another night when I found her in our home in complete darkness. She woke up from the sound of my bed and came to me. She was wearing only thin lingerie, and she slowly ran her fingers through my hair, whispering words of comfort. Her breath was hot, her touch confident. We ended up in each other's arms, and I couldn't stop myself as her hands and lips explored my body. And then came the fateful day. My son had gone on a business trip, and she came to me as usual, under the pretext of helping with housework. She was wearing a short robe, with nothing underneath. She entered my bedroom, where I was trying to hide from her charms, and began slowly, teasingly, removing the robe. I could no longer fight myself. Her lips found mine, her body pressed against me, and I was lost in the whirlwind of her passion. Our meetings continued. She would come to me when her husband was at work. Her desires became increasingly sophisticated. It was as if she enjoyed my weakness, savoring every fall. Every time she left, I felt dirty and worthless, but I couldn't stop. My wife noticed the changes in my behavior and started to suspect that something was wrong. Her doubts intensified as I increasingly stayed late at work or avoided family dinners. She couldn't understand what was happening to me. I couldn't tell her the truth, knowing it would destroy our family. She began to follow me, and at some point, she suspected I had something to hide. One day, when I was on a business trip, she decided to check what was happening in the house herself. She came home unexpectedly, planning to surprise me. That day, just when my son had gone on a business trip, she saw Maria enter the house and noticed through the window that the bedroom light was on. Without hesitation, she went inside and headed for the bedroom. When she opened the door, her eyes met a scene I would never want to see. I was sitting in a chair, and our daughter-in-law was straddling me, completely naked, saying something very obscene to me and asking to be spanked like a bad girl. My beloved wife, Kate, froze in place, her eyes filled with tears as she realized her worst fears had come true. Shock and anger overwhelmed her. She couldn't believe it was really happening. My wife, trembling with rage and pain, packed her things and left the house. In that moment, not only was our marriage destroyed, but also her trust in me and our daughter-in-law. My son soon found out what had happened, leading to the final breakup of their relationship. As soon as Kate left, the reality of what I had done hit me like a ton of bricks. The weight of my actions crushed me, and I felt as though I had destroyed everything I had ever valued in my life. The house that once felt warm and full of love was now cold and empty, haunted by the ghost of my betrayal. I tried calling Kate, sending her messages, begging for her forgiveness, but she refused to respond. The silence was more painful than any words she could have said. Maria, on the other hand, didn't seem fazed by the destruction she had caused. She continued to act as if nothing had happened, as if our secret affair had been perfectly normal, something to be celebrated. She even suggested that now that everything was out in the open, we could be together without any pretense. But the thought of being with her in the light of day, without the cover of secrecy, made me sick. It was as though the thrill of our affair had only existed in the shadows, and now that it was exposed, it lost all its allure, leaving only guilt and regret behind. I started avoiding Maria, staying locked up in my room or leaving the house for long drives with no destination, just to escape the sight of her. But she didn't let up. She would knock on my door, call my name sweetly, or leave notes under my door, reminding me of our time together. Each reminder only deepened my self-loathing. I had fallen for her charms, and now I was paying the price. Weeks turned into months, and the life I had known unraveled completely. My son moved out, refusing to speak to either of us. He blamed me, and rightly so, for tearing apart the family. He couldn't understand how I could have betrayed his mother and him in such a horrific way. I had no explanation, no defense. All I had was the shame and the realization that I had lost everything that mattered. One evening, Maria came to me one last time. She was dressed in the same robe she had worn that first night she seduced me. She sat on the edge of my bed, looking at me with those same seductive eyes, but now they held no power over me. "We could still be happy," she whispered, reaching out to touch my hand. But her touch, once electrifying, now felt cold and repulsive. I pulled away, unable to look at her. "Leave," I said, my voice hoarse. "Just leave." She hesitated, perhaps thinking she could change my mind, but then she saw the finality in my eyes. Without another word, she got up and left the room. The next morning, she was gone. She had packed her things and left the house, leaving me alone with the ruins of my life. Now, as I sit in this empty house, the memories of my betrayal haunt me at every turn. The rooms that once echoed with laughter and love are silent, filled only with the ghosts of what used to be. My son, my wife, even Maria, they're all gone, leaving me to drown in my own guilt and regret. I blame her for everything, but deep down, I know it was my weakness that caused this disaster. I allowed myself to be seduced, to be led astray, and now I'm paying the price. I am alone, surrounded by memories and guilt, with nothing left but the echo of my own mistakes. The image of Maria, her smile, her touch, haunts me in every corner of this empty house. I wish I could turn back time, undo the choices I made, but it's too late. The damage is done, and I'm left to live with the consequences, knowing that I've destroyed the lives of those I loved the most.